Hi everyone, Stephen here, and welcome to this 10-episode review of You Are Admirable. This project and these interviews have been an absolute joy to create, and every one has provided an incredible amount of value for me. I put together this review of just one of the things that I've learned or heard from each of my first 10 admirable guests. These specific highlights are all ideas, thoughts, and concepts which I now find myself sharing often with other people in conversations. It was even difficult to choose exactly what to highlight in this episode because each interview has so much to offer. So if something sticks out or speaks to you specifically, I highly recommend checking out the full interview because then you can get the context of what was shared and also all of the other great stories and insights. Let's start off with the first episode with Missy O'Malley, where she offered her thoughts on dealing with haters.
I think I'm just entirely too sensitive. I always have been a people pleaser, and I've always wanted to, have everybody like me, or you don't like me, how come, what did I do? And they're like, I just don't like you. I'm like, okay, there's nothing I can do to change your mind. You know what I mean? And now I've kind of got past all that. Yeah. And, if you try to please everybody, boy, you're going to end up really failing yourself. It's like a Judy Garland quote of some sort of like, be the first-rate version of yourself because everybody else is already taken, or an Oscar Wilde quote or whatever the hell. But nice. One of those kind of things where it's like, why are you trying to impress somebody else when it's like, now you're not being true to yourself?
Sometimes people just don't like you. If you try to please everybody, you're going to end up really failing yourself. Thanks, Missy. Up next is Erin Roberg, responding to my observation of how she is almost always still positive and supportive, even in situations where, from an outsider's perspective, she may have every right to feel peeved or wronged.
Yeah, I probably never really became a thing until I became, a director, and artistic director and stuff. I probably didn't have to do that so much, before then. And it was really hard at first because you're like, oh, I have to teach people a lesson, or I have to do this. You go through it and you're like, oh, I don't like conflict, and da-da-da. And so there's this whole balancing game where that's concerned. And for the most part, I guess what I kind of come to is that everybody fucks up, in their life. And we all have our foibles. And to chastise or berate never feels good, and I don't think it's ever really ultimately, maybe for children or something like that, but once we're adults, I think people usually turn you off, or and turn you zone you out or whatever. And so I think the best way to deal with that kind of situation is to be understanding and still let them know that maybe they can do better and that sort of thing. But I don't think chastising is really the most effective way to deal with that situation. Yeah.
Everybody fucks up in their life. We all have our foibles. What a great word. To chastise or berate never feels good, and once we're adults, people will turn you off and zone you out. It's much better to be understanding and let people know they can do better. Thanks, Erin. Molly Hannon is next with her response to a question about her biggest failure.
I think that's one of my biggest failures, is that I haven't experienced enough failures. Like, seriously, I have been trying to talk to my kids about that a lot, because that's one of my biggest fears in life, is failure. And it's such the wrong thing to be afraid of, Yeah. Because that's not what it's about. And it's not necessarily failure, it's learning. I didn't have the courage to try enough things, or to risk failure. And so now I feel like I'm doing that more and trying to do things with that in mind, not with the goal of failing, but with the idea that if I do fail, it's okay. Mm-hmm. And I'll have more of a story to come from it than not trying. I think belief in yourself and taking chances is the biggest thing you can do.
It's not necessarily failure, it's learning. Thanks, Molly. Kip Savoy is next dealing with the question of what accomplishment are you most proud of? And this was his response after I suggested a possible answer might be found in his film work.
I feel like none of that stuff matters. I mean, the stuff you make and develop, and I mean that stuff like has a life and then it disappears and people forget about it, and it doesn't matter at the end of the day. What matters at the end of the day is how you interact and treat other people, I feel. I mean, this is like we're all in this together. Yeah. Whether you want to be or not. That's the reality of the situation. So to me, that's always been kind of like behind everything. It's like what matters is your relationships and how you treat other people and how they treat you. And that is what keeps going. Not some film you worked on 10 years ago or 20 years ago, whatever it is.
What matters is your relationships and how you treat other people and how they treat you. That's what keeps going, not the thing you made 10 or 20 years ago. Thanks, Kip. Up next is Todd Hobrecht sharing how the movie Meatballs with Bill Murray has helped him through tough times and allowed him to find the fun in life and not take things too seriously.
There was this scene in that movie where everything was falling apart for them, and Bill Murray got them to start doing this chant, and they started jumping up and down, and they started going, "It just doesn't matter, it just doesn't matter, it just doesn't matter." And that became a mantra in my life that I have carried for almost 40 years. And it's just like when things would get really intense, I always tend to knee-jerk to, it doesn't really matter. Why is everybody getting so uptight about this? When things are okay, you don't need to pull that out. But usually I'd pull that out when things really sucked. And I'd be just like drowning, and then I'd go, wait a minute, it just doesn't matter. And then people say it in different ways, this too will pass. There's lots of different ways people say that, and they all kind of lead to the same place, where it's just recognizing that this is a moment. As terrible as it is, it's just a moment.
It just doesn't matter. It just doesn't matter.
It just doesn't matter. Thanks, Todd. I've shared that one a lot. Up next is Ryan Lawrence Flynn discussing trauma.
To date, like the most intense trauma that I've experienced was in my mid-20s. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'll be 30 this year, so it wasn't that long ago. Being on the other side of that now, and as I was getting to the other side of it, I was definitely able to recognize the value of having experienced it in the first place. The question is an interesting one. Like, do we make people better and more fit to handle what it is that life throws at us by putting them through trauma intentionally? Obviously not, but it's still a question that can be asked rhetorically. We don't necessarily continue to live with that trauma. Obviously, some things will be triggered always. Mm-hmm. And depending on the severity of trauma or the nature of the trauma. But there is so much opportunity to learn from it also. Yeah. And so it's this thing that I do recognize as having enriched my life, even though it was horrible. Even though I can sit here and say that thing that I went through was truly awful and I would not want to relive it. But would I change it? Not necessarily.
It's important to recognize the value of trauma. We can learn from it and let it enrich our lives. Thanks, Ryan. Up next is EJ Porth, sharing her perspective on her immense capacity for volunteering, having time, and willpower.
I don't know, when you're passionate about something, it doesn't really feel like work, and you make the time. It's not like I go to any of those obligations and think to myself, wow, I really wish I wasn't here. And if that ever happened, I think I would stop. Yeah. But it's a joy. It's like everyone has their hobbies, and my hobby is working with nonprofits and doing good things with really cool people. I like how Molly said it's effortless, because that's truly how I feel. Like when I put in the time, I don't feel like I'm there are times when I feel overextended, but for the most part, I'm like, this is just what you do. This is when I'm presented with a problem or there's something I care about, it would be so much harder for me to not act on it. Because I feel like I can't solve all the problems. I can't give away all the money, but I can help in some way. And that's a pretty easy thing for me to do. Sometimes I get frustrated because I work on boards or I work with people who are like, I just don't have time. I'm so busy. And I respect that because I'm at a point now where I've had to say no to some things. But I'm like, especially people my age that don't have kids. Yeah. I'm like, really? Are you though? I mean, I'm not trying to get on them about it, but I think it is a mindset. Like, they do have the time. And it would all be about priorities. Mm-hmm. So yes, you have the time, but maybe they don't prioritize this over something else that they do, which might be really important to them. So I think it really is, it's a mindset. It's not about time. It's not about your skills. It's about making it a priority and having it be something that's really important to you. I really like seeing things happen. I think you get willpower from like getting little wins, like having little victories and putting your effort into something and then seeing it work. You're like, oh, I have power. I can make things happen. And sometimes I fear that people feel like they can't make change, and so they don't. Yeah. Because they don't have the confidence to know that their input or their time or their ideas would move the needle. And not that I'm moving large needles by any means, but I feel like in small ways, I've seen results, and I'm no one special, but I put in the time because I care, and then things work. And I think also connecting with other people who also believe the same thing, want to get things done. I mean, I can pretty quickly identify the people in my life who are kind of side by side with me on all of this and do the work and put in the time and want to give back. And I surround myself with people like that. You know, I don't have time for people who don't give a shit. Yeah. You know, it sounds bad, but like there's not a lot of room in my life for that, because what's the point? You know, like whether it's the arts or whether it's kids or your church or your family, like there's got to be something that drives you. Yeah. And I would like to think that the people that I've surrounded myself with and the people that are lifting me up and pushing me forward are the ones that have that. And they're just constantly reminding me about or connecting me with what they're doing, or I'm connecting them, and we're kind of just keep this thing going. And I feel like I surround myself with some pretty, mainly women, like just badass women. Badass women who will just move mountains. So I think when you have wins on your own and you see just incredible women doing really incredible things together, it's kind of hard to not think you could do a lot, you know? Yeah. And I wish that more people had that, like I said, like confidence to feel like they could do something. And I think a lot of it's that they don't have maybe mentors or people in their lives that are kind of stoking that in them. And I wish that they had it. It's hard.
Volunteering. It's not about time. It's not about your skills. It's about making it a priority. Thanks, EJ. Here's Kristen Glasheen, aka KP, with her thoughts on the path to loving oneself.
I really just got sick and tired of feeling unloved and abandoned and alone. It ruled like my emotions and everything I did for so long. Again, it was like this or that, you know, I can either figure it out and do it for myself, like fill that cup for me, or I can walk around for the rest of my world being like, are you gonna fill my cup? Yeah. Like, will you fill my cup? Like, somebody please just like fill it for me, you know, when you're like, it's in your hands. Like, you're the one that has control of whether that cup is empty, full, overflowing. And I think that just based on where our society is these days, we like miss a part of that and all of this like shit that's going on, the social media, like what we're talking about earlier, you know? And again, Facebook for me was this like empty cup, like sitting out there in the world, this fake world of the interwebs. And I think that's what it is for a lot of people. And it's like, we check to see who's filled our cup for the day. And it's incredibly sad, really, when you think about it. And like, that was like my real life, like outside of Facebook, that was who I was for so long. And interestingly enough, it's something that I am really working on right now with myself, because although I've been through it and I've learned how to fill it, I still really catch myself. Like, even I might have a full cup, but I'll like pull out a second one and be like the guy on the street, you know, like shaking it with like maybe one little penny in there. Like, do you want to fill it? Do you want to fill it? You know, and it's like, it's addicting. Like, when people tell you, you know, oh, good job, or, you know, whatever it may be, I think that like cues things inside of us that like make us feel good, which it does. And it becomes like another chemical addiction for people. When you start working on yourself and you can be self-aware, you start to see those things inside yourself. And that's where it becomes simple. Like, if you just slow down and listen and like question yourself a little bit, there's so much there for you to learn from. We just miss it half the time, you know? So right now, I've noticed that, like, oh wow, here I am out there shaking my cup. Like, do you want to pat me on the back? Well, do you want to pat me on the back? And I'm like, all right, like I need to check myself, because I don't need that. I may want it, but I don't need it.
Love is like a cup. It's in your hands. You're the one who's in control of whether it's empty, full, or overflowing. Thanks, KP. Up next is Eric Funk, speaking on how to go about being a person who makes people feel good just for being with you.
I want to impart that which I know. I want to help people learn how to think, don't want to tell them what to think. I mean, I'm sort of the critical thinking arena. But beyond that, there's an entertainment piece to this, where you have to be able to engage with people and get them to drop their guard and to laugh and to open up and learn. And so there is a certain amount of grooming behaviors. Or, for example, when I was teaching honors college text and critics type classes, my opening gambit with the students was, in my section, you need to think and speak in questions. And so it disempowers the alpha male or the alpha female from slam dunking the answer and stopping the conversation. So they can't say, and that's why the sky is blue. They have to say, and is that why the sky is blue? And you get this buoyancy. And so when you practice that and you start nurturing young people to do that, in the name of great conversation, you start to sponsor inquiry as a form of knowledge acquisition, the Socratic dialectic. And so what happens is they start to realize the value of that when you're with someone, like you're doing right now. You're asking me questions, and we're engaging around this, and I'm kind of throwing questions back your way in terms of how I answer the question. There are interrogative teasers that are laced in there that allow this sort of liftoff that makes it alive and exciting. And it makes our time pass very quickly, but at the same time we can go really, really deep, because in this instance we're both in a state of wonder. Value is not a noun, it's a verb. And so we're both looking in the same direction, and we're kind of wondering, and we're getting a depth of field, a parallax that we're achieving just because of you being one eye and me being the other eye in that binocular vision. If I had a different person, it would be a different thing. And we've all had that experience where you go to a concert or you go to a play or you go to a film with somebody, and you have an experience that's different depending on who you went with. It's the weirdest thing, and I'm not really sure, but I think it has something akin to this. Yeah. And so being passionate, being honest about, being passionate about the things that you really care about, being earnest, being playful, not taking things too seriously, but also taking them very seriously simultaneously. So there's a sort of a playfulness and a disregard in a braid with a very deep respect for the whole thing. And when you run into somebody who's doing that same thing, it's a magic afoot. I mean, really things start to happen, because we've all had those conversations where you don't want the conversation to end because it's so alive and it's so full and rich. And then the next day you think, I've got to get back together with that person because that was amazing, and you can't make it happen again. It's really tricky. But I think once you fall in love with that experience, you can create pathways for that to happen. And if everybody's down and everybody wants to go there, it's more likely to happen than the cast off. It's not going to happen, so what's the point in engaging?
Think and speak in questions. Don't slam dunk the answer and stop the conversation. Thanks, Eric. We'll end with Kyle Sorensen sharing his thoughts on his experience with debilitating illness and pain.
There's the part of being sick that manifests itself in the symptoms themselves, like the pain and the part where you just feel shitty. But I think the other part of illness that's equally as bad, or maybe worse, is that it destroys your motivation, and it makes you feel disconnected from everybody. And just by its very nature, like when you're sick, other people have a harder time empathizing with you, because they can't. You can never experience somebody else's pain, and even when you try, even if you had a similar experience, there's just something about, like, if you're fine and somebody else isn't, it's just really hard to understand the degree to which, pain can affect other people. And so I think the thing that I learned about the thing that I learned from being sick is that even though it's a super shitty situation, you end up doing yourself a lot of damage by I don't know, pitying yourself or defining yourself by how sick you are, and you end up hurting yourself because you end up creating more distance between yourself and other people, which is oftentimes the thing that maybe you need more than even like to get better. You just need to have like human connections. So I think, so fortunately I ended up getting a lot better after about a year, but I think that aspect of just recognizing that no matter what your circumstances are, you always have to put effort into all situations. You have to be, if you want to have good relationships with people, it's always going to be largely incumbent upon you to be creating conditions that build bridges. And it's not fair. Like, I mean, if you're sick, I do think there's a point when you get sick enough that maybe you just don't have the energy to even be able to do it. But I think basically, yeah, I just learned that to some extent you are going to be responsible for even if things are bad, you have to be responsible for your interactions with the rest of the world.
When you're sick, you end up doing yourself a lot of damage by pitying yourself or defining yourself by how sick you are. You end up creating distance between yourself and other people when human connections are often the thing you need more than just to get better. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks for watching and listening to this 10-episode review of You Are Admirable. If you enjoyed this episode or any other, please like, share, and subscribe. And remember, you are admirable. See you next time. And the last thing, and
Even if we win, ha! win. Even if we play so far over our heads that our noses bleed for a week to 10 days. Even if God in heaven above comes down and points his hand at our side of the field. Even if every man, woman, and child held hands together and prayed for us to win, it just wouldn't matter because all the really good-looking girls would still go out with the guys from Mohawk because they got all the money. It just doesn't matter if we win.